Hello and welcome to our video series on Node.js. We'll talk about Node.js and what the purpose of Node.js is, and talk about what is ES6. The acronym for ES is ECMAScript, and currently the version that we're on is 6. Here's our agenda. We're going to walk through installation. We'll discuss what is Node.js, asynchronous programming, and how that differs from synchronous programming. And then we'll walk through creating modules. And in the second half of this video series, we'll focus on NPM. But for this video, what I would like to do is just focus on the installation of Node.js and just briefly talk about Node.js, the benefits of it, and then also what is this idea of asynchronous programming. So here's the site you would go to if you want to install Node.js onto your local machine. So if you right click and open a new tab, it's going to take you to nodejs.org. And what you want to do is you want to download the recommended version, which is the 12.18.4. Now, at the time of this recording, it may be a different version, but always go with the LTS version, the recommended version. The current version may have some bugs that they're still working out, so it's best to go with what they recommend here. So this is it already recognized that I'm visiting this site from a 64 Windows operating system. And so if you're doing it from a Mac, it'll show up as download for Mac OS, but the version that we want is Windows 64. So I've already downloaded this on my machine, so I'm not going to install this, but what I would like for you to do is pull up our editor, Visual Studio Code, which I'll be using throughout this video series, and then I'll bring up the terminal, a bash terminal, to make sure that that Node.js is successfully installed into our machine. One of the cool things about Node.js is that when you install Node.js into your machine, it also comes with the NPM Node Package Manager. And if you remember me saying this here, is that we'll talk about Node Package Manager in the second part of this video series. And so, but let's go ahead and bring up our editor and then bring up our terminal, and just to check if we've successfully installed Node.js. All right, so here's my terminal. Here's my editor. I'm going to bring up my terminal. And like I said, I'm doing a bash terminal here. I'm in a folder called fall 2020_ex as a test. What I'm going to do is create a new file here, and I'll call this file Node.js series. And I'm going to cd into this folder here. So I'll just say cd Node.js_series. And this is a check to make sure that Node is installed on my machine. I'll just go ahead and click on Node and then -- version. That'll give me the current version that I have installed on my machine. If you don't have this version, if you're unable to produce that version number, you want to make sure that you revisit the installation process. Something may have went wrong with the environment variable, but make sure you're able to pull up the version number before you proceed with this video and the videos that follow. So we have Node installed, and we'll come back to this folder here and begin to do an example, but let's continue on with our slides here. So here's a working definition of Node.js. There's a lot of language here. Some of the things that we'll talk about is this idea of it's event driven, right? Some of the keywords, it's non-blocking, input-output model. It's very extremely lightweight and efficient. And it has this really one of the most popular packaging ecosystems that a lot of developers contribute to, and where you can host your own packages at. And like I said, we'll focus more on NPM later in this video series. Here's my working definition of Node.js. It's essentially JavaScript on the server, right? We're familiar with JavaScript on the client side, where we're able to do some validation checking, some calculation, and we typically pair it up with HTML and CSS. But Node.js can be done on the server side, and that's the game changer here, where we can actually use JavaScript as we know it as a back-end language. And so, like I said, this is the working definition for Node.js, and you'll see that it also is built on Chrome's V8 scripting engine, and so JavaScript engine, and so we'll talk more about, again, this idea of event-driven, non-blocking, some of the features that make up Node.js. So event-driven and non-blocking input output. This video, not this video, but this picture here gives a good visual of what is happening with Node.js. If you could kind of visualize from start to finish, if we had a very small program, let's say for instance, at the start of our program, we want to read from a spreadsheet, and we also want to send out an email, right? Those can be represented as tasks. And so if you see where my mouse is circling that here, and during the duration of our program, what we could do is we could trigger an event, and one event may be to read the data from a spreadsheet. So that will be one event, and we kind of signify that as a task. Task 2 may be to send out an email. But what happens in the duration of our program is that event is going to trigger, and we have what we call this Node.js event loop. And one of the things you'll see is that's asynchronous, in that it's a single threaded language or a single process language, in the sense that when it's going to basically run from the top to bottom, and it's going to run one thread or one process. And so what will happen is the event will trigger, and it's not going to wait for that task to finish. And so if it's going to basically read in information from a spreadsheet, it'll send out the task to this Node.js event loop, but it's going to go immediately to the next task or the next process or statement within your code. And that's the non-blocking functionality, right? Most languages will wait. And so if you had task 1, which is going to read from a spreadsheet, it will wait. It's going to do the task, and it will wait till that spreadsheet is read into your program, and then it will go to the next task. That's not the case with Node.js. Node.js, like I said, it will do task and say, hey, I'm gonna throw task 1 at the event loop, and I'm gonna keep going. And what's gonna happen is that that task will call back once it's complete. And so this is what makes it extremely fast and efficient, because it can have many different tasks, many different tasks can be going at one time, and those tasks will call back once they're done. But the program can be completely done before these tasks are finished, and so you can still be reading in items from the spreadsheet, and the program can be completely finished, right? And that's this idea of callback function, where it'll call back once that task is done. And so, like I said, the best way to illustrate this event-driven, non-blocking functionality of Node.js and its asynchronous nature is to do an example, and I'll say more about this here. So what I'm going to do is copy this code here, and I want to create a program here. So I'll just go here, I'll click out for test.js. I'm already in my Node.js _ series, and I'm going to create a new file here, and I'll just call this, let's see here, touch async.js. So I created a file here I call it async.js within my folder here. I'm going to paste this code, right click, and I'll just paste here. And we'll talk more about what this fs require equals require fs. That's a core module that's built into Node.js. What we're going to do is we're going to create a file called subjects.txt within the root of our Node.js series folder. So I'll just say touch, and I'll say subjects, and I'll correct it here in my file as well. Subjects. And then within that subjects.txt file here, what I'm going to do is just create some names. So I'll just say Noah, I'll say Christopher, and I'll say Silas, and I'll say Leah, and I'll save it. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read in these names into this file, but I want you to pay attention to what happens here. All right. So I'll save this here, and what's going to happen is that it's going to run this function, this read file function. And like I said, this is the nature of Node.js, where it's this asynchronous, non-blocking input-output. What's going to happen here is we're going to output the information from this subjects.txt file to the console. So those names should be output here. Now, the question I have for you is, what do you think is going to output first? Do you think the contents of the file is going to output first, or do you think this statement here will output first? And that's a question that I want you to observe, to basically see what happens. And like I said, this here demonstrates the asynchronous functionality of Node.js. So let's go ahead and run our program. So let's bring it back up. And how do you execute Node.js? One of the things you can do is say node and then give it the file name. And so we can say async.js. And then here, let me just do one thing here. Let me clear my terminal first, and then let me run that command. So now watch what happens here, right? So here, what we find is that this statement on line 7 outputs first. One, that's extremely fast, right? And so even though we have the console.log contents is here on line 4, and it comes before line 7 is output immediately before it's read from the file. And again, this is demonstrating the simple fact that Node.js does not wait for its task. It doesn't say, hey, read in things from subjects.txt, and then once you're done, go to the next line and output this statement. No, what it does is it sends out, this triggers an event. It gets put on that Node.js event loop as a task. It'll do the task, but the language will continue on to the next statement. And so it's extremely fast and efficient. It's asynchronous in the sense that it's not going to wait for anything. It's going to continue on. It's a single thread, but then this will call back with the contents once it's done. And that's why we get Noah, Christopher, Silas, and Leah. That's after line 7. Hopefully this makes sense. There are ways to prevent the asynchronous functionality within Node.js, but by default, that's what goes on when out of the box with Node.js. So feel free to play around with this file. We're going to talk about modules in our next video, and kind of talk about what are core modules, built-in modules, and then how do we create our own modules within Node.js, and how we begin to use modules in different files and share that with the rest of our program. Again, hopefully you have a better understanding of this asynchronous functionality, and that it's non-blocking in the sense that it's not going to wait, but also that this idea of callback, where it'll call back once it's done, and again, that it's asynchronous and that it's a single thread, a single process that runs. There's not multiple threads in the sense that it has multiple tasks that it's gonna trigger a run, right? So our next video will focus on modules, and stay tuned for that.